Okay, so this session is going to be about working with LGBT people. I'm Eric Banks. I am a social worker in a children looked after team. I am the LGBT rep for Social Work Action Group, and I volunteer at a LGBT youth group. So well versed in this topic. I'm hoping you'll get lots out of it. We've got myself and Omar that are going to be speaking about specifically social work related things. We've both got a social work background. I've also got some really amazing guest speakers that are going to be talking to us about how to improve our practice with LGBT people. And we've got our Twitter there, which you can give us a follow, a tweet about how you found the session afterwards. So in terms of why we need this session, so I'm just going to give some statistics here and just speak about why this session is so important about improving our practice with LGBT people. So 1 in 4 LGBT young people have reported they don't have an adult to talk to at school, home or elsewhere. So we as social workers could be that adult for that young person, specifically if they're involved in social care, if they're looked after. It's really important that they have someone to speak to about these issues. The deficit in education and learning for social work students about LGBT issues. Often social workers report feeling underconfident about working with LGBT people in terms of what terminology to use and how to support people. So I know my education at university when I was training to be a social worker wasn't great about LGBT issues. And I really hope that, by coming to this session, by involving yourself in training about LGBT issues and about how to work with people, we as social workers can feel more confident to do this. And then 67% of trans respondents said that they avoided being open about their gender identity for fear of a negative reaction from others. So it's really important that we empower people to be able to express their gender identity, express how they're feeling, and make them feel welcome and safe within social work. And then finally, just the presence of homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia in day-to-day life for LGBT plus people. So we need to make sure we're being supportive, that we know what we're talking about when we're working with young people and adults that are LGBT, and that as social workers we're equipped as possible to support this group. So now we've got a Menti, which I'm hoping is going to work once it loads. Right, so if you go to www.menti.com and use that room code, you'll be able to answer this question. Hopefully the answers will appear live on screen. And that's just, what would you like to learn about working with LGBT plus people? Just so we can make sure that the session addresses any specific questions, me and Omar know what to focus on, and that type of thing. But we've got some answers I'm just going to read out. So we've got how to support older people, so over 65s that are LGBT plus. The correct terminology to use, how best to support young people of LGBT community. I've got my test there. Language of how to refer to people. Do you think being heterosexual is biological or environmental? So that's interesting. I don't know if we'll have time for that kind of debate within this session, but it is interesting to include. So reaction to the Tavistock recent High Court ruling. So that is also another interesting topic. Not sure we'll be able to cover it, but it's just interesting to get people's views. So language of how to refer to people, how best to support young trans people, definitely. So if we can do any more. So, so we've got a good idea there of what people would like to learn from this session and specific areas that we can kind of talk about. That's that. So just moving on. So in terms of some key definitions for people, just so we kind of know the basic terminology about when working with LGBT plus people. So I'm just going to read these out so we know what we're talking about and how to refer to people. So we've got non-binary, which is a spectrum of gender identities that are not exclusively masculine or feminine, identities that are outside of the gender binary. So broadly speaking, you would use non-binary to refer to that kind of identity. You could use genderqueer, gender fluid, etc. So they all kind of fall under that spectrum. So we've got lesbian, which is a term meaning women who are sexually attracted to women. We've got pansexual, which is a term meaning someone who is attracted to personality rather than biological sex or gender. Bisexual, a term meaning someone who is attracted to two genders. Gay, a term meaning someone who is sexually attracted to people of the same gender, usually men attracted to men. MTF, which is male to female, person who was born biologically male and identifies as female. MTF, so female to male, a person who was born biologically female and identifies as male. And then asexual, a term meaning someone without sexual feeling or association. So hopefully they're things that either you knew already and it's a refresher, or things that you weren't really sure of in terms of definitions. So in terms of this slide, so I asked the group that I volunteer with, that's an LGBT plus group, what they would like their social worker to know in terms of how to work with them, key things that they think are really important for social workers to know when working with LGBT young people. And just to pick out a few things, so they said they'd want them to know who they're out to, which I think is really important to think about in social work in terms of confidentiality. Often a young person can have lots of different professionals involved in their care. For example, if they're looked after, they could have their social worker, their personal advisor, their foster carer, school, their friends. You know, it's really important that we don't out young people and that we consider who a young person's out to, who they've given consent to know about their sexuality or gender identity, so that we don't make them feel uncomfortable in any way. And then another one is just the freedom to speak freely. So we should be as informed as possible about working with LGBT plus young people, and we should ensure that a young person always feels safe to, you know, express, whether it's experimentation with their gender and sexuality, or it's them coming out to us. We should always make them feel welcomed and supported, and in our role as a social worker. So in terms of practical advice, in terms of making your practice more LGBT plus friendly, so in the office, you could do really easy things like add pronouns to your email signature, dead easy, really quick, but it just lets people know that you support and understand what pronouns are and support LGBT young people. So an example of a pronoun might be he, him, she, her, they, them, being the most common ones, but obviously have some minority ones as well. So go on research and training. So it's all great that we're here. Obviously that counts as sort of learning more about LGBT plus things. There is specific training you can go on that's put on by different local authorities. So keep an eye out for that kind of stuff. To celebrate LGBT plus History Month and Trans Day of Remembrance. So History Month was obviously in February, and there was lots of events going on about that. So go to as many as possible. Trans Day of Remembrance tends to get a little bit forgotten in local authorities. So really important to drive that and make your local authority aware of it so we can celebrate it. Challenge homophobia and transphobia, especially in regards to people we work with. So just challenging if you hear a comment that you think is untoward towards LGBT plus people, making sure that everyone is aware that what is acceptable and what's not. And that kind of falls hand in hand with being an open ally. So in terms of actually working with specifically young people that are gender diverse, sort of made up this acronym, which is BANTS. And it stands for to be accepting, which is basically just accepting a young person's gender identity for what they tell you it is. You know, they're the expert, which is something that we always say in practice, is a young person is the expert of their life. So to trust that they know what they're talking about when it comes to how they want to express themselves. So as I said there, a young transgender person needs to trust that professionals will accept them despite potential conflict in personal values or ethics. So we need to be really aware of our personal values, whether that's your own personal thoughts about gender diversity or sexuality, and make sure that's not translated into the young people that we work with. So then secondly, to be non-judgmental. So professionals should act as a trans ally and advocate for trans people where possible, especially in terms of other professionals as well, to make sure they know that you inform them and teach them as much as you can. So to be trans affirmative, so professionals should be open-minded and listen to young people without judgment. And then just to be sensitive, so coming out on topics on sexuality and gender can be a bit awkward and embarrassing for young people and for professionals having those awkward conversations. And it's really important that practitioners have empathy and approach these topics with sensitivity. Right, so now I'm going to pass you on to Omar, which is going to speak a little bit about the project that we did with Social Work England about working with LGBT people. So go for it.
Thanks, Eric. So, hi everyone. My name is Omar Mohammed. I'm a BA2 social work student. My pronouns are he, him, and yeah, my sexuality is quite kind of complex at the moment, but yeah. This not this morning, but like kind of this afternoon, I did a presentation for Social Work Week all about student activism, and kind of what I'll be talking about for about 10 to 15 minutes is going to be about part of that student activism alongside Eric, obviously as a newly qualified social worker, and kind of social work academics, people with lived experience, kind of everyone kind of involved in social work. So we did a project with Social Work England where kind of 36 people from a variety of professional and personal experiences, as well as gender and sexual identities, kind of came together in kind of a large group meeting. We also had kind of written contributions as well. And we all kind of prepared an agenda of what needs to change in social work and what needs to improve in social work in terms of kind of the wider LGBTQ plus matters in society, but also specifically for social work, education and practice. And kind of, so what we did is we prepared that agenda, and then a kind of a small group of us kind of went to Social Work England and spoke with a few of the staff members and some of the leadership in Social Work England to discuss, debate, and kind of demand some actions that should be happening and changing for social work as a profession, and where social work should be moving in terms of the work with LGBTQ plus people. So there were lots of kind of key ideas that were coming from the wider group of 36 people. Some of the key ideas were that some of the key ideas were that there were lots of over homo and transphobia in the workplace and during social work education. There were concerns around social workers being openly homo and transphobic, and this just being accepted and not being challenged. Kind of people not feeling confident or comfortable enough, in their situations to challenge someone, using either homo or transphobic language, or just kind of direct comments that are, directly kind of, either homo or transphobic. There were lots of kind of key ideas around and lots of concerns around students feeling that they're unable to kind of come out to their cohort or to their practice educators, kind of staying in the closet and kind of showing this link that, this shows a heavy impact on the mental health of students, and, practitioners and service users, that are part of the LGBTQ plus community. Kind of, if social work students, social work practitioners are not able to kind of come out and feel welcomed within their workplace or their university, then that's going to have, quite a negative impact on their mental health. And then there was this quite bold idea, but I think it's a very kind of well-informed idea, that social work should come away from calling itself a social justice profession until it is one, basically. And there's still a long way to go, I think, and that the group thought that social work has a long way to go in order for social work to call itself a social justice profession. So in terms of kind of social work education and practice education, there were these discussions around the fact that students can go their whole social work education without touching on LGBTQ plus issues and matters even once. And we were discussing that there needs to be a higher commitment to anti-oppressive values, and specifically anti-homophobic and anti-transphobic values, and kind of combating that oppression and that discrimination. And the fact that this should be challenged on placement. There needs to be kind of more placement opportunities, more placement experiences with LGBTQ plus individuals. Practice educators should be prepared and competent to work with LGBTQ plus students. Kind of, understanding how a student being LGBTQ plus, within that community is going to affect their practice, or, how does that make them feel and view themselves as a, future social worker or trainee social worker. There were also kind of ideas around whether there should be an option to train to be a kind of specialized social worker within the LGBTQ plus area. And in terms of kind of the case studies and assignment tasks that we get, the assignment briefs that we get in social work education, a lot of these case studies tend to be heteronormative, and they lack any kind of understanding or representation of gender and sexual diversity. Then moving on to kind of social work practice. There were lots of discussions around practitioners needing a much greater amount of confidence to respond and support the whole range of LGBTQ plus identities. And a lot of this came from the people with lived experience that were part of the project group, and they were saying that lots and lots of social workers that were working with them weren't able to have the difficult conversation about their sexuality or their gender. So definitely, a way forward is, social workers need to strive to have these difficult conversations, and they shouldn't be difficult. Social workers should be spending time kind of increasing and improving their confidence and competence in this area, so that safe spaces can be created for the people that we do work with. There were comments around kind of there needs to be more understanding of the importance of power dynamics. When social workers are being heteronormative, which means they're lacking an understanding of someone's gender or sexual identity. A person with lived experience, or a child, a young person, a family member, they're not, most of the time they will feel a struggle to try and challenge that social worker because of the power dynamics, and also because of the stigma that we have in society today, that definitely has an impact on these power dynamics. We were talking about that there needs to be a stronger sense of anti-oppressive practice with LGBTQ plus people within CPD, so continuous professional development. The fact that practitioners should make it good practice to evidence their learning and development in all of the whole kind of anti-oppressive, anti-discriminatory umbrella, kind of all the areas. And obviously, today we're talking about specifically LGBTQ plus matters. Within CPD, and kind of registering with Social Work England and having to do your CPD every year, there needs to be so good practice would be that there needs to be explicit evidence that you have done something or improved your training or your learning or your knowledge around LGBTQ plus matters, and that should be across all of the anti-oppressive umbrella. It's just some other things that came out that Eric was talking about. So using pronouns and other signals that service users and colleagues feel supported to feel their identities and will not be kind of rebuffed or kind of made to be discriminated against or anything like that. It's very easy, as Eric was saying, kind of like things like email signatures and stuff like that, to just add your pronouns and showing that you're welcoming towards people when you're being non-judgmental and things like that, and inclusive. There were these things about kind of information of services being sent out often misses out LGBT plus services. So kind of if you're creating a general service list of kind of the services in the area for, let's say, young people in a residential home, something like that, most of the time it is missed of the LGBTQ plus services in that area, and it's not something that is added to that list unless someone has come out as LGBTQ plus. But they might be in the closet or they might be questioning themselves. So kind of having the services in the area on the kind of the general list kind of improves inclusivity and will hopefully make people LGBTQ plus people feel a bit more welcome with that service. Kind of going back to like the whole heteronormative kind of case studies, also in practice, recording systems, so any assessments, referrals, things like that, applications, many of them are heteronormative, and they need to be more diverse and inclusive of the wide range of gender and sexual identities. Kind of only allowing for male and female options is heteronormative, and it can be damaging to those from the LGBTQ plus community. Social workers need to understand about the significant rates of self-harm and suicide among LGBTQ plus young people, and particularly transgender youth and non-binary youth, and the kind of long-term mental health implications for LGBTQ plus young people in general. And social work has a massive part to play in that. And I think social work is in such a privileged position to either be helping to increase or decrease that. And I think we need to be kind of reflecting on where we are now. So just finishing off on practice. So there were these discussions around kind of these discussions around managers needing to be trained and develop a higher awareness of managing LGBTQ plus staff, kind of more informed supervision, more inclusive organizational culture. And this involves kind of challenging people on a daily basis, you know, that are maybe misinformed about a gender or sexual identity, something like that. And I think something that's really key is understanding the trauma sometimes of being a learning tool for everyone else. So if you have an LGBTQ plus staff, you know, working at at your organization, you know, they shouldn't be the learning tool for everyone else. You know, everyone should be making an effort to learn themselves and being able to have these conversations as a team and as an organization. It is not just up to LGBTQ plus people to fight for LGBTQ plus rights. You know, it is all of our responsibility if we really want to be a social justice profession. And the last thing I just want to leave you on is this little story about social workers making assumptions about people's sexuality. I think this was one of the biggest things that came out of the project, is that a lot of the time social workers enforce assumptions and they remove the opportunity for young people to explore their identity. Kind of, you know, assessments should ask for sexuality and gender identities, and young people should be able to explore their sexuality or gender identity without kind of having labels imposed on them. So there's this little story about a young person who was in foster care that was part of the project, who came out as bisexual to their social worker, and the social worker said, just because you're a slut doesn't mean you're bisexual. And I think that I'm just going to leave that on that for all of us to kind of reflect on kind of social workers enforcing assumptions on children, young people, and the people that we work with, and maybe how how not to do that, and you know, kind of going forward, ensuring that we can work effectively with LGBTQ plus young people, because again, we are in a very, very privileged position to support and help and be there for people. So yeah, that's me.
Cool, thanks, Omar. So now we're just going to move on to our guest speakers. So just to let everyone know that these guys aren't experts in social work. You know, they're not practitioners. They're people that we feel, as in myself and Omar, feel that will offer a really good insight into how to work with LGBT people. So you know, I'm hoping that you can learn a lot from them, and that we'll be respectful in terms of listening and considering how we can improve our practice after hearing from them. So if we start with Chandler, that's okay.
Hi, I'm Rachel, she, her pronouns, and I'm Chandler's interpreter for today. Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to be on this panel. My name is Chandler, they, them pronouns, and I'm non-verbal. I have been co-chair of LGBTIQA plus Greens, was also a member of Youth Parliament and been a parish councillor. I've had social services involvement periodically over the last 11 years or so. This was primarily through children's disability services due to what was at the time severely disabling Tourette's and comorbidities. Currently, I receive services through adult health and social care for a complexity of reasons. I was already familiar with social discrimination, isolation, and fear of just being me long before I came out as trans at 15, but that hasn't made it any easier. In my experience, it is my being trans that some social workers and other care and support workers have struggled with more than other issues. I believe this to be for a mix of reasons, and if I'm being fair, I hope more through lack of awareness than ignorance. By taking part here today, I hope to help with some of that. That said, I think it's imperative to bear in mind when meeting with anyone who is trans that they are highly likely to have faced or been around outright transphobia from people who work within the public services sector. On top of that, many will either have then been not believed or had it swept under the carpet with excuses. Understandably, This impacts on well-being and causes lack of trust and caution. It can make complex building of a relationship with new people, especially if mistakes are made, no matter how big or small. Trans issues are separate from other struggles the person you are helping may have. It brings its own problems and carries its own scars. Being trans is not a result of mental illness, autism, or abuse. We are who we say we are. That's not up for debate or dispute. Pronouns are really important. They absolutely do matter. It should be automatic to ask and not assume. Equally as important is consistency of using those pronouns across the board, not just in person, but when talking with others, and especially in paperwork. Paperwork seems to be where some of the best intentioned people mess up: written correspondence, reports and care plans, etc. Again, in my experience, being non-binary seems to raise significant challenges for professionals in the way they speak to and about me. The worst of this I have experienced is within the health profession, even when in their care for significant lengths of time. Regularly being told using they, them pronouns, or even just using my name instead of he or she, is just too difficult or hard work has absolutely no place in any kind of care. It's not okay, it's not acceptable, and it's not safe practice. Being misgendered and or being dead named really hurts. It causes trauma and often triggers self-harm, substance abuse, eating disorders, and worse. You get to move on. The misgendered person doesn't. And they and those around them are left to deal with the effects of this, or the person alone if they don't have supportive family, which sadly many don't. When you ask and talk about family, remember for queer folk, family is often less about DNA and more about their community. Downplaying the importance of that can leave many isolated in time of need, especially for young people or anyone without that support within their homes. Some people may not be out to people in that setting, even if they are to you. Not all trans people have gender dysphoria or will transition. Some don't want to, and that's fine, but tragically, many simply can't afford to. Waiting times for gender clinics just to be seen in the first place is a matter of years, not months. Others may not be able to access services due to health reasons or being denied. This is why we need you in our corner if other professionals break guidelines and won't support us. There is no widely accepted evidence that puberty blockers cause irreversible changes nor damage to young trans folk. Giving them time to delay puberty until they can transition will help them, not harm them. Asking questions and making mistakes is okay. It's about handling them right and learning from them. For mistakes, apologise and move on. Don't make a fuss dragging it out. No need to bring it up again. Just don't repeat the mistake. Asking questions. For some people, being trans is a large part of their identity. For others, it's just a small part. Some will be happy to answer questions, others not. Follow their lead respectfully. Learn about the reality of LGBT+ lives. The reality, not what most of the media portrays. Pick resources carefully. Look at statistics of issues like homelessness, mental illness, suicide, and suicidal ideation, self-harm, eating disorders, school, employment, and healthcare. Use free reputable sources like Stonewall, Gendered Intelligence and others. At all costs, avoid Mumsnet, Fair Play to Women, Women First, Salvation Army, and LGB Alliance. They may pretend to care, but they are the main causes of suffering to publicly LGBT+ folk and their families, especially in times of need. Lastly, please be an ally whenever and wherever you can. Allyship, just like democracy, isn't just about voting for better representation, about responding to calls from the community, but about the fact every individual has the power to really make a difference. Calling out injustice when you see it, being there for people where they need you, and setting an example for those around you in helping shape a better, more just society for everyone. As to me, what the unbreakable beauty of the LGBT plus community comes down to is love, acceptance, and fact. Even though many come from all types of backgrounds, all walks of life and identities, but the bond that people should be able to love who they love, be who they are, and know they have unconditional love and family in their communities. And to me, that is what allyship comes down to. Showing unconditional love and support for people to be their true self and have a space they are safe to reach their potential. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Chandler. That was really powerful. I think I could listen to you talk all day. So thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts. If we can move on to Sam, I'll stop sharing my screen because I know you want to share yours.
Thank you, Omar and Eric. Yes, let me just share my screen and make sure it's all working okay. So, God, what am I doing? Right, what can you get rid of this? There we go. Okay, so hopefully, can I get a yes if you can see the slide?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, I just really wanted to begin by saying thank you so much to Chandler for their talk. It was incredibly powerful, and I think it is exactly what I would like to kind of follow on in terms of building empathy for trans people specifically. And to be honest, if you just want to listen to that talk again for 10 minutes instead of this one, you know, be my guest, because it was excellent. So thank you. So yeah, my name's Dr. Sam Martin, and I work at the Nuffield Department of Primary Care Health Sciences at the University of Oxford. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about meeting the support and care needs of trans young people, specifically, and a little bit about me to begin with. So I identify as non-binary, and how I like to define this is I don't define myself as a trans man or a trans woman or male or female. I see myself outside of the gender binary and everything that kind of comes with it. However, I do identify also as trans feminine. So I suppose I shift more to the feminine end of the spectrum when it comes to expression and how I feel about myself. And my pronouns are they, them. So I started off my career as an LGBTQ psychologist, and then moved into counselling and psychotherapy. And then in 2019, I got my PhD while developing online interventions for trans and non-binary youth. I'm currently a researcher looking at the trans healthcare experiences of young people throughout the UK, and we're developing online healthcare resources for trans young people and their families. Now, I said I got my PhD in 2019. However, that wasn't the most exciting thing. Oh no, that was appearing on the front cover of the Oxford Times. Still something I look at and makes me smile. I mean, you're practically talking to a celebrity, let's be honest. My research, I have conducted interviews with around 100 trans and non-binary young people across the UK over the last four years. I look at experiences of healthcare, prejudice and discrimination, the media, and LGBT education. But I'm going to be focusing a lot now on healthcare in particular. And I'd like to build on what Chandler was saying around trying to encourage empathy. So in this short presentation, I'm going to try and trying to emphasise the need for empathy and understanding of trans young people, specifically within the realm of healthcare. So what you can see in front of you is an empty triangle. And how I'd like to talk about trans healthcare needs is using the kind of the visual of a pyramid. And so right at the very bottom, I would like to draw attention to the needs of trans young people. And the first one is identity needs. So right at the bottom, with the largest, the largest block, we have identity needs, which means that every single kind of trans person, trans young person will have needs related to their identity that can be met through listening, for example, empathy, lack of discrimination, understanding, kind of really these kind of key four kind of points around when interacting and working with trans young people as social workers, as healthcare professionals. All trans people have identity needs. That's fundamental, but that could be where it stops. Once you provide a trans person with the listening and empathy and understanding that they deserve, potentially that can be where their healthcare journey ends in particular. However, a little bit further up, some trans young people or people in general might also have psychological needs. And by that, I mean that they could be useful to refer to the Children and Adolescent Mental Health Service, or for counselling and psychotherapy, to talk about kind of underlying like trauma throughout their life, or just to get things off their chest. Everyone can benefit from a space to talk about their feelings and experiences. I, in particular, as a counsellor, I believe very much in that kind of providing an open space for people, and it's a really useful healthcare and support need. And that also may be where trans people finish their kind of journey in terms of healthcare, finding that space in order to talk and explore identity and just explore life in general, can be the kind of the stop-off point. However, from there, young people and adults can potentially make a referral to the trans or gender identity services throughout England and Wales, and Scotland as well. At this point, it may be because a young person or an adult has medical needs, such as what Chandler was saying in relation to hormone blockers, or for adults, the introduction of cross-sex hormones. Also, fertility preservation is something that can happen at this stage. And so it's not all trans people that have these medical needs. However, it's something that it can be in the life experience of a trans person. For me specifically, I have recently started a journey on hormone therapy, and so I have been hoping that my needs are met at each stage. And then for some trans people, but not all, right at the top we have surgery needs. And so when I talk about surgeries, I mean gender confirming surgeries, potentially facial surgeries, or top or bottom surgery, which hopefully we can't go into much detail in relation to healthcare, but this is hopefully just giving a very kind of quick picture of what a healthcare journey might look like for a trans person. So I wanted to use a quote from one of my studies. This is Zoe, and she says that every trans person I know has a healthcare horror story in one form or another. Everyone knows someone who has been discriminated in some form or another. Everyone knows someone who has struggled with it, whether they've been through it themselves, whatever it is. And this is true. I mean, I have my own healthcare horror story, as do, I'm sure, a lot of trans people. This can include the huge waits for the very first appointment. Like Chandler said, we're talking about years. Some people I've spoken to throughout my interviews and talk about waiting up to 4 or 5 years just for that very first appointment. And so that's a complete lack of support from professionals, and just left on their own to cope without any support, unfortunately. Now, that's a common horror story for a lot of people. And what I want to move on to next is the journey to support. Now, in terms of building empathy towards trans young people, I'm going to be drawing attention. I'm going to be using a metaphor that might seem quite playful, but it does have a serious underlying message. I'm a bit of a geek, and so the metaphor I'm using is going to be Lord of the Rings. So what you can see here is the journey from Hobbiton to Rivendell, and how I like to think about this journey is the Rivendell being a place of finding support. So that could be where a trans person comes to find support from a social worker or a healthcare professional. And what's important about this journey is considering just how traumatic it can be. So we start the journey to support with Frodo and Sam marching outside Hobbiton. Sam takes his first steps outside of Hobbiton, and they begin their journey. However, what we do realise from the story is that they face a number of challenges throughout their journey, and so we can see them cowering here from the Black Rider. And what I mean to emphasise by this is that there's a lot of psychological trauma that people can go through. Transphobia, like Chandler mentioned, this could represent the media and all of the misinformation and transphobic messages that get shared on a day-to-day basis for young people. And so when a young person comes to you for support, they are dealing with a lot of experiencing this kind of transphobia throughout their lives. We also know that the journey continues into Bree, and they're hunted, and then also Frodo gets stabbed by one of the Black Riders, and this is a important message in the fact that what he experiences is a race against time and a fight for life or death. And this is an incredibly serious point that I want to make, is that suicide rates, as Eric and Omar are talking about, are incredibly high. Self-harm as well. So there is a lot of emphasis on the fact that young people deserve your empathy and understanding and care, because just getting to that appointment can feel like a race against time in order to get the support that they need, and hopefully begin their actual journey. And then at the end we have Rivendell, and obviously it looks here as like as a beautiful paradise. However, when a young person reaches your support as a social worker, potentially think of it as this kind of place for recharging, as a way for them to begin their journey with the rest of the fellowship further, and also it should be a place of should be a haven, a place of respect, a place of confidentiality, and also for empathy. So I hope that gets across the kind of the message that I wish, albeit with a strange metaphor. So Zoe also talks about the waiting list, and it's just getting longer and longer. At this point, it's almost half a decade. There's so much waiting. I'm on a 3-year wait list at the moment. I'm halfway through to get seen just for the first appointment. So she's really trying to emphasize this point that we have half a decade to wait for any kind of support, and this might be the experience for the young people that you see as social workers. We have media talking about legal action over gender clinic wait, and self-medication is also something that it's important to be aware about with young people who you might see as social workers. A lot of people are driven to self-medication through not being able to access the healthcare that they need, and obviously this comes with its own risks, but it's a desperate situation for a lot of people. So I can't talk a lot about everything. I just wanted to give you a little snapshot to hopefully build some empathy. These are some important resources. In terms of healthcare, Ben Vincent's book on transgender health, A Practitioner's Guide to Binary and Non-Binary Trans Patient Care, is fundamental, I think, for all healthcare practitioners or people who want to know more about the healthcare needs of trans people. And Ruth Pearce is a fantastic academic when it comes to trans health. If anyone has any questions or Fitpla or wants to get more information and support, then please feel free to email me, sammartin@phc.ox.ac.uk, or tweet or anything like that. So thank you for your time. I will hand back over.
Cool. Thank you so much, Sam. Super interesting, and thanks for coming and sharing your research. I love the nerdy anecdote, so I really enjoyed that. And if last but not least, we could pass on to Marion, please.
Hi everyone, I hope you're all well. Thank you so much for having me. I am not sure how I'm going to follow two very fabulous speakers. Yeah, there's a lot, thank you so much, Chandler and Sam as well, really insightful. And actually really connected to social work. I don't have any experience in social work, actually. I used to be a carer a couple of years ago, so I was carer in the community. So maybe that's a tangential link there. But in terms of social work itself, that's not something I have experience in. But what I will be talking about tonight is just my experiences, as a queer Muslim, looking at LGBTQ people of color kind of issues in the workplace. We'll speak a little bit about kind of navigating health services, but talking about intersectionality and what that means and how we can be an ally to the LGBTQ community, but also to the Q2POC community. So that's queer, trans, intersex, people of color, just in case people might not have heard of that acronym before. And I'll also be looking at what universities can do and what students themselves can do in terms of looking at LGBTQ plus awareness, throughout the studies and I suppose generally in life. So the first bit I want to talk about is just to kind of mention people are so worried about, I think my experience, what it has been kind of within kind of community organizing or, in the workplace, is that people are really worried and anxious to talk about issues that they don't know a lot about. We see this a lot around race, and we certainly see this around kind of gender and sexuality. And my point is, it's fine to get things wrong, as Chandler said. We're not perfect. We're all human. We're going to make mistakes. And more often than not, people are going to know what your intentions are. I think that's really important to keep in mind. And also, if we're not asking questions, if we're not going away and doing the research ourselves, how are we going to learn? Nothing's ever going to change. So I suppose stepping a little out of our comfort zones and kind of taking the time and being a little brave, I think, is something that we all need to do, in many ways, whether that's in the workplace, whether that's in education. So yeah, those are some key things I wanted to kind of talk about. But just kind of moving on to kind of myself and my own identity. So I identify as Muslim and also as queer. So the pronouns I use, I prefer they, them. I don't mind she, her. And even in myself, it's been an interesting and a long journey. So, when I was younger, I thought of myself in silos. I thought that I couldn't be, then I identified as a lesbian. I thought I couldn't be a lesbian. that had to like exist here, and then I had to be South Asian here, and then Muslim over here. I couldn't understand how I could be all of those things, but then I learned that actually I can be all of those things because I exist in and of myself. But navigating the world in these particular identities can be really difficult. You know, in many ways, experiencing you know, racism and Islamophobia generally in the world, you know, whether that's in the workplace, whether that's in society, but also within the LGBTQ community. And then, you know, aside from that, when I'm in some religious spaces, not feeling so easy and being a bit worried about how people might perceive me, you know, if they know that I'm part of the LGBTQ community. And all of these anxieties is something that, you know, people do carry a lot of, particularly, you know, when they're part of the LGBTQ community, knowing what spaces are safe, you know, or not. And that's just a daily thing. That's just something that you keep in the back of your mind when you enter a new space. Whether I feel like whether people admit it or not, there's an automatic. It's almost like a subconscious thing now. I don't even think about it. It's just something that's in the background of how safe is this space, how open can I be, what parts of my identity may I have to tone down to keep myself safe. You know, and when you fit into multiple kind of categories of identity, it can be really challenging. So that's just something to kind of be aware of, you know, when you're approaching LGBTQ people, and support for LGBTQ people, you know, when you're working with them in this context will look different, especially if they fit into different marginalized groups. For example, if they're a person of faith, and also part of the LGBTQ community, you know, when you're supporting them, it's really important to ask, you know, do they have an LGBTQ community around them? What does that look like? But are their faith needs also being met as well? And then what do those intersections look like? Around the country, there are a lot of kind of LGBTQ organizations for people of color. So there's, you know, plenty to reach out to. I know that Stonewall have this really great resource around identifying mostly grassroots organizations throughout the country, which is really important. Yeah, so, you know, that's kind of talking a little bit about experiences that people of faith that are also LGBTQ might face, and, you know, just understanding that, you know, there may be people that are, you know, observant when it comes to the faith, and, you know, others not so much. But what's really important to recognize is the higher risk of isolation that people that are of faith and LGBTQ face. And just kind of recognizing that and offering support in that way. We've talked a little bit about, well, Chandler and Sam have spoken a little bit about kind of navigating health services, so I won't labor on that too much, but generally, just to kind of say that, you know, especially with COVID and the pandemic, there's an understanding, a wider understanding actually, that BAME, so Black, Asian, minority ethnic people, have shared their experiences that they've received unequal treatment from healthcare staff because they are LGBTQ, and also because of their cultural background as well. So it's worth kind of bearing that in mind, and the disproportionate kind of things that, you know, LGBTQ people face, especially when they're also BAME. I interchange between using people of colour and BAME because it depends what people use, and I feel like in this setting it's mostly BAME that people use more. But one thing I wanted to kind of mention a little bit more is the idea of intersectionality. So it's a fancy academic word. I'm not bothered about people knowing the word itself, but actually what it means is the idea that there's different aspects of our identity, social and political, and looking at how they overlap. So, for example, I shared that I'm Muslim and queer. That's an intersection of my identity. You know, when we're looking at ourselves, maybe we can understand, you know, what different identity categories that we might fit in. You know, it can be religious, it can be sexuality or gender. but also class as well, and looking at that and addressing how the way that we work changes depending on who we're talking to or who we're supporting. I think that's really important. And understanding that, for example, a cis LGBT person will have a different experience than a BAME LGBT person because of the overlap of those particular identities, just as an example. I don't know how much time I have left. I feel like I'm just talking. Oh, no one's telling me. I'm just going to carry on talking.
I'll just come in. Yeah, we are running a little over, so it would be good if we could come to a close. That would be great. Thank you.
But in terms of, I think the biggest thing to kind of talk about, well, not the biggest thing, but a helpful thing to talk about is allyship and what that actually looks like. So I mentioned before about being a little brave, not being worried about getting it wrong, but also looking at, other ways of what allyship looks like. So listening to the communities that you're wanting to support, what are the issues that they feel comfortable about, and also looking at our own power and privileges that we may have. In certain communities, we're going to be listened to more than other people. Finding ways that you can support those communities, whether that's writing letters to your MP. Stonewall have a conversion therapy, banning conversion therapy as an example of what's happening right now. And just coming out to support LGBTQ people. In the chat, I'm going to share a couple of resources, actually. A couple of toolkits. The first one is an intersectionality toolkit, which I helped develop a couple of years ago. And it's really great. It looks at various intersections. It's being a bit slow to load, Teams is, so I'm going to hopefully share that. So that's the first one. And then there was another one done by Saba Chowdhury. So the first one's by IGLIO, which is the International LGBTQ Youth Organization. Second one is by an activist you may have heard of, Saba Chowdhury, who also works at Mermaids. And then the final one is Unorthodox. So that's a book about LGBT plus identity and faith, and I've written a chapter in that as well. So these are just some really cool resources that you can kind of go away and read in your own time. So yeah, I'll wrap up.
Cool. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Really interesting. It was great to hear you speak. Thank you to everyone for letting us all come and speak to you about working with LGBT plus people, specifically our wonderful guest speakers. I've definitely learned lots and have a lot to reflect on. I hope that you all do as well. So thank you very much, Social Work England, for having us as well. That's all from me as well.
That's great. Thank you, everybody. I just want to go to Laura. Are you with us, Laura?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, amazing. Hello, everybody.
So that's great. So as I said, Laura is our illustrator. She's been capturing some of the key themes that have been shared from today's session. So hopefully she'll be able to share a screen and show us what she's been capturing.
Can I be given permission to share, because I've been brought in as a attendee rather than an organizer?
Okay.
Is it possible with our
Yes, of course. Philippa, are you able to do that? Finding you on my list, Laura, just bear with me.
I'll do some filler. As an LGBT person, I found this session particularly inspiring, and also I was really clear with Social Work England that I would really want it to be at this session because I think it is so important. And a couple of the key themes that have come out for me is this idea of I really liked what Mariam, we were just talking about, your intersectionality, because that is so crucial to realise that our needs aren't just as LGBT people, it's where we are in a class system, our ethnicity, our faith. And I think it's really important to recognise those nuances. I think pronouns are really important for me in my position of kind of white privilege, and that I can pass as a straight woman. Didn't really realise how profound pronouns are, and so that's something that I've taken, away from this, is that, even the simple thing of putting, she, her at the bottom of my email could do so much for our community, and that creating that sense of safety. And I was really intrigued by what Chandler said as well about, I'm just looking through my notes here, about allyship, and also, again, just how we need to, I think you said something about it's not the responsibility of LGBT people to kind of fight for our rights, like it should be everybody's. And this idea of unconditional love and support. And then as a fellow Lord of the Rings geek for Sam, I got to draw Rivendell, which was incredible, which I know isn't the point in that presentation at all. But again, the centre of empathy being central to healthcare and recognising the journey is different for every trans person. And
you can share.
Can I share? Yay!
Yeah.
Here we go. Right, I will start at the very beginning. Here we go. So you put me through my paces tonight, folks. There was a lot going on. So can we see this? I'm looking for a nod or a yes. Is that a yes?
Yes,
Thank
that
you.
is a yes. Yeah,
Right.
sorry, I thought you could see my thumbs.
No, it's fine. Sorry. So Eric and Omar went through 4 key things here. So why we need to have this talk and why this presentation is here. And I was shocked about the level of poor education around LGBTQ plus needs, and also that 1 in 4 young people don't have an adult to talk to, and 67% of trans youth are not open about their identity. And obviously we've just got bi, trans and homophobia everywhere. So we need to do the best we can to stamp that out together along with our allies. I like the practical advice about adding pronouns to email, improving our research and training, celebrating events and history, having open allyship, and also challenging hate when it comes up. Be ants is something that I want on a t-shirt for definitely. So about being accepting, non-judgmental, trans affirmative, and also sensitive when dealing with LGBT plus youth. And then Omar talked about his experience with improving engagement within social work with LGBT plus youth. And we looked at the agenda that the group discussed. And there were a few key themes there about tackling bi, trans and homophobia, improving education for practitioners, and whether that could be an LGBT plus specialism in future, improving confidence and competence in practice in dealing with LGBT plus issues, and overall thinking about how this anti-discriminatory practice can underlie everything that you do, and addressing different power dynamics and heteronormativity. We then heard from our amazing guest speakers. So Chandler went first here on the right. So Chandler being non-verbal and trans, and shared their experience of transphobia, and loved the statement that we are who we say we are the experts of our own identity, so don't question it. We talked about pronouns being crucial again, and how families being quite complicated for LGBT youth, because the families are often those that you've chosen in your community rather than your biological family. And I liked the list of things that we can do as allies, about doing our research and finding our research from reputable sources, using pronouns, stepping up and challenging when we need to, and moving on from mistakes, not being afraid to make mistakes, but learning and moving on from them, especially when that comes to naming and pronouns. And also loved the final statement, really, which is about unconditional love and support. And then Mariam just spoken to us about their experience as a queer Muslim. And I love the statement of people are anxious to talk about issues they don't know about. And this idea of being brave and stepping up and voicing your experience and raising awareness. And that this navigation of intersectionality and safe spaces is so complicated, and that needs may vary across that. And I really related to that idea of safe spaces, and this kind of unconscious filtering of am I unsafe here is something I could really relate to. And then we had in the middle of all of that Sam talking about Lord of the Rings, but also empathy as central to healthcare, and looking at pathways for trans youth, and that not one size fits all, and that actually empathy is a journey, and how, you know, if you imagine Frodo and Sam going to Rivendell, how that trans youth go through stages, and some of the hardest stages are just this race against time of getting support and actually getting their first appointment, but the end goal is battling the wait list and finding a haven where they have a community that accepts them. So in a nutshell, that's what we've been chatting about for the last hour. These will all go up on the online gallery, and they'll be shared on Twitter as well. So please keep a lookout for those, and I will stop my share now.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Laura. So we've come to the end of today's session. So I'd just like to say thank you to all of our presenters today, and to Laura for that wonderful illustration. There's quite a few people in the chat asking for copies of the presentation. We can't offer that, but we have recorded the session, as we've said, so we know that people will be watching it back and will be able to get a lot more benefit from it the second time, I'm sure, and I'll be one of those people. So we really appreciate all of you attending today, and we would really value it if you could fill out the survey that we've popped in the chat. We'd welcome any thoughts or feedback that you've had via our post-event survey or by emailing us at socialworkweek@socialworkengland.org.uk. And also just a reminder that if you are a social worker, then you can reflect on this session, or you are reflecting on this session, and I saw a lot of reflection within the chat, then please do use that as part of your CPD. We really hope that you found this session beneficial, and we look forward to looking at those reflections. So thank you once again. We hope that you enjoy the rest of the week, and we look forward to being there with you and celebrating social work. Thank you, everybody. Good night.